Okay, good evening. Welcome to tonight's meeting. We've got a pretty full agenda tonight, so we'll get moving. Before we do start, first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting tonight, and that's the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. We are live streaming our meetings and have been doing so for some time now. So this meeting is being broadcast on the internet, and the recording of the meeting will be published on the Council's website. As a visitor in the public gallery, you may be filmed. By remaining in the public gallery, you consent to being filmed and for the recording of you to be made publicly available by the Council. A copy of the Council's live streaming and recording of Council meetings policy is available at the back of the room and is on the Council's website. Please speak with one of our staff members if you have any questions in relation to that. Apologies. We have Councillor Sullivan who's away on leave. Any others to be noted? None. Thank you. We have a request for leave of absence. We have that leave of absence be granted for Councillor Grisbeck from the 25th of September until the 7th of October inclusive. So have a mover, please. Move. Thank you, Councillor Aiken. You'll be flying a solo, but I think you'll be okay. And seconding, Councillor Nelson. Those in favour, those against, that is carried. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes of our meeting held on the 30th of July. Move Councillor Contell, seconding Councillor Mansfield. Those in favour, those against, that is carried. Thank you. Any declarations of conflicts of interest to be noted this evening?
Mayor, I'm a conflict on item number 5. One of the contractors mentioned in that tender process is a customer of a company which I'm a director of.
Thank you. If there's any other issues arise during the meeting, please just let us know as we go along. Public question time and submission time is an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question. We have 11 or so that have been sent through, so we'll go through those first. Some of the questions are quite long, but we'll try and deal with them in the best way we can. But what I am requesting is that the question is read and there's not long-winded commentary before the question. We do have a bit to get through this evening, so I just ask for that to be respected, and we'll see how we go. Our first question is from Marie Fagan. Is Marie with us this evening? Just come forward and have a seat there, and we'll take your question.
Marie Fagan. Okay, I had those before, so excuse me if I blunder a bit. So I've sort of got my questions at the bottom, so I'm not quite sure. Do you want me to read out the questions first, or just?
I've got, there's 5 questions I've got, so.
I've put down to 3. I'll just read out what I've got here. So I would like to bring to your attention and ask questions on your plans for tackling urban sprawl and the consequences it has for climate change and the environment in our region. I have long been interested in the role of urban sprawl and the detrimental effects it is having on the planet worldwide. It would be an unpleasant reality that Australians must face, and that is that our houses and backyards in their current forms must urgently be halted and higher density living put in practice. If we continue to expand our cities at the current level and destroy the environment for all living species, then we have failed in our duty of care for this planet. A good book of reference is Retro Suburbia by David Holmgren. My questions are: 1. Has the Council discussed this problem at all, and what is their view on it? 2. Would the Council consider putting aside land, not just vacant blocks, for nature reserves which can never be built on? 3. Will the Council consider a massive tree and meadow planting throughout the city of Greater Geelong to give displaced animals and insects a home? Thank you.
In relation to question 1, has the Council discussed the problem at all? Council adopted the Geelong Settlement Strategy in October 2018, which sets out how the city will provide housing for projected population growth to 2036. This includes increasing the share of housing from infill and urban consolidation from 35% to 50%. It also includes increasing housing diversity and density of housing stock. Currently, 85% of housing stock is made up of detached suburban family homes. We are seeking to change this through diversifying housing stock in both established areas and in new growth areas, greenfield development sites in particular, with a focus on transport corridors and activity centres. The City is aware of the work of David Holmgren and has previously sponsored a visit by David to Geelong. In relation to, I think your second question, I have them out of order here, so if you just bear with me here. In relation to does Council have the courage to face the opposition to higher density? Council has policies and strategies in place to increase housing and population density in targeted areas. High quality planning and design are crucial to public perceptions of higher density living. Council seeks to achieve high quality design and amenity outcomes to counter some of the opposition to higher density living. Council also carries out community engagement on planning around these issues to help educate the community and ensure community views and values are incorporated. In relation to question 3 I have here, in the immediate time frame, what is Council doing to protect our environment? To protect our environment, Council identifies land that is appropriate for development. Land approved for development is located within a settlement boundary. Land outside the boundary cannot be developed. The City is currently working with the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning to strengthen our existing settlement boundaries, particularly on the Bellarine Peninsula. The fourth question related to would Council consider putting aside land in future developments for nature reserves? In terms of nature reserves, this already occurs. Before land is developed, studies are undertaken to understand the environmental and biodiversity attributes of an area. High quality areas are set aside to form part of nature reserves or other green spaces, such as parks, waterway corridors and recreation reserves. Council also looks at securing land through initiatives such as the Trust for Nature. I think the final question I had was in relation to consider massive tree and meadow planting throughout the City of Geelong. Council has an urban forest strategy which seeks to increase Geelong's tree canopy cover from 14 to 25% over a 30-year period. Council also encourages the use of locally Indigenous plant species in public spaces. We also have environmental and biodiversity strategies which seek to protect what remains and identify at a landscape scale where corridors would benefit local wildlife. This includes planting on both public and private land, so community education and programs such as Gardens for Wildlife is critical. They're my responses to your questions. Thank you. Councillor Aiken.
I just wish to add as well too, and probably personalise the response. Council actually does have the courage to talk about this issue and has evidence to support that as well too. And an example of that is the Barwon Head Structure Plan, where Council was put under immense pressure to increase the urban sprawl associated with the expansion of Barwon Heads. It rejected that. And part of being able to do the Barwon Head Structure Plan and confine that space in that significant environmental area, we did have to increase the high density living within the boundaries. So not only has Council debated the issue, we actually have evidence to show that we support this as a planning principle in the Greater Geelong region, and the Barwon Heads Structure Plan is the best example of that. And in terms of responding to the issue about trees, an example is on National Tree Day, Council actually funded 3,500 trees to be planted on that one single day. And this year, the concentration of those trees was actually in the northern suburbs, in the area that both Kylie and myself represent. But the Council does have a significant strategy which is publicly available. It talks about our tree planting program, and that program isn't just isolated to occur on one significant publicity day. The Council is committed to greening Geelong significantly, and I think 3,500 trees is a good example that we're pretty committed to that as a project as well too. So the Council is behind what you're actually asking us in the question that you've given us tonight. Yeah.
It helps me a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate your questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Graham Hobbs, is Graham with us this evening? There he is. Thank you. Evening, Graham.
Good evening, councillors, mayor. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm here in relation to the post office. You've all received, I hope, detailed information, not only from myself, but also from a number of other speakers here, particularly Lex Chalmers. My question is, and I've got just a little addition to it, why does this City Council appear to divest itself of a unique opportunity to create a centrally located information and social history and design centre when the city has a UNESCO category to fulfil? Why not create a magnificent facility similar to the Bendigo former post office, which is an invaluable asset to that regional city? The supplementary question is, where is the money from the coalition Sarah Henderson was leading promised to assist Geelong? Why not use it? I think it's called the City Deal. And just as a comment, I've been interested in James Harrison, and this place wouldn't be here without him. And every time you open the fridge, you should say thanks to James Harrison. I don't know if you've seen the mud map, a world first for refrigeration and also air conditioning. You start looking at those sort of things, how it affects us today. We should recognise him. This is a unique position, and the post office, and I think you've seen the photo of the Bendigo one, very similar structure. I've been there, and they took 10 years to get it going, but it is a magnificent addition to their city. And with the development along Ryrie Street and around there, we need a centrally located information centre. That's my question.
I appreciate your comments. I think you'll find the Bendigo Post Office had a substantial state government grant applied to, which was basically the impetus. But that's Bendigo. We're worried about Geelong tonight. We appreciate your comments. Look, there'll be further discussion tonight where that item will be debated and discussed. I'm sure more will come out in relation to what you've raised.
I've seen the information you've provided there, but I just say there is finances available. We should use it. Thanks very much.
Mr. Graham Smith. Is Graham with us this evening? If not, we'll take his question on notice. Sonia Van Hewitt. Is Sonia here this evening? Welcome.
Very much. I'd just like to preface it with thanking all the councillors and the Mayor for answering me on a Sunday, and especially Councillors Asher and Mansfield for their extended responses as well. I'd also like to say that Surf Coast has declared a climate emergency as of this evening. So I'd like to congratulate the Surf Coast. And in deference to what the Mayor requested about not having long prefaces to questions, I'll go straight to my questions. Essentially, my questions relate to rebuttals from your comments from last meeting, and I was unsatisfied and a little disappointed with some of your answers, so I'll just bring up those. I'm not comfortable with being a public climate activist. I'm a researcher and an academic. I'm not comfortable with being on the front line, and I'm not a confrontational person, so to me this counts as confrontation. I don't think many of my environmental colleagues are very comfortable with all of this as well, but we spend time with our family, we have free time, but we do this because we feel like we have to. My question is, in 10 years' time, will every single member of this council in 2019 be able to state unconditionally and uncategorically that today you actually did everything in your power, professionally and personally, to take climate action? Because we're so close to the tipping point at this stage. Are you prepared to step out of your comfort zone like I am? I'm terrified being here. Really is a very uncomfortable situation for me. Are you prepared to take stance against corporations and businesses that only have economic considerations? And I know you outlined a number of things that Geelong Council are doing, but I think perhaps it needs to ramp up a little bit, like we need to ramp up as well, the whole idea of saving what we've got left of the earth. That's my question number one.
Just in relation to the questions, sort of question commentary, and I'm not going to go back through repeating what the council is doing because it is extensive and it has been well documented. It's on our website, so that information is readily available and has been for over 10 years.
I have gone through your website. It's a minefield. It's not very logically laying out. I'm an academic. I went through it. It was not easy to negotiate at all. And a lot of it is outdated. So, I'll get there. My second question is, when will the City of Greater Geelong take responsibility for the detrimental effects of environment of poor quality building practices, which is evident? Poor infrastructure design, cheaply built houses. Quite often the builders run the whole regulation part of it. There's no standards that are law enforceable. I could give you dozens and dozens of examples of that, not within the City of Greater Geelong per se, but I went on a bus through Marshall a couple of weeks ago, and the number of roofs without trees in that area, and there's all this roof area with no solar panels, nothing on there. It's just a wasted environmental harvesting opportunity. So when will you develop bylaws to enforce that builders actually adhere to what they say, not retrospectively finding out that they've done the wrong thing and then having to find the builders who have since gone out of business? And also with the fragmentation of the open spaces, because you can provide open space, but if you don't provide the corridors from one large open space to another, you don't provide corridors for animals to be able to move, and a drain does not provide for non-aquatic species. And my third question is... I'll
do it one at a time.
Thank you.
The Council does have sustainable development guidelines which we enforce quite strictly, and I'll leave it at that.
Geelong has this opportunity from this day forward to be a state and a national or a world leader, second largest city in Victoria. If you enforce high-calibre eco-construction, if you mitigate strongly greenhouse gas emissions and control them, if you provide community hub energy and water harvesting, will the Council be committed to the extent that they will demand, oversee and enforce the highest standards to be adhered to, and that these standards cover any pending, which is current, and further permits for any construction within the municipality? And I'm going to be submitting something on the Marshall precinct plan as well at the next meeting.
I'll just reiterate what I've said previously in relation to our commitment to the environment and our commitment to sustainable development guidelines. This council has an extremely good track record in recent times about its commitment, as I say, to the environment and to the built form that's currently going on around us.
I just make a comment?
It's question time, and I've been generous thus far.
Okay, thank
but
you.
I do appreciate you coming in. Thank you. Judith McDonald. Is Judith with us this evening? Good evening.
So, based on your asking not to have too much said before the questions, I'll also respect that as well. So my question is about plastics. I will say that I did take my 4-year-old granddaughter down to the plastic dump site in Lara, which I'm sure everyone's well aware of. And she was devastated when she saw that, quite concerned. And when we spoke about how the world might look if that's how we treated all plastics, her comment to me was, "Nanny, that couldn't happen. Don't be silly." And she then paused and looked at me and she said, "You wouldn't let that happen, would you?" So I say to everybody here, how could I look into her eyes knowing that her future is compromised? And how can anyone sitting here today look into their child or grandchild's eyes and not want to do everything within their power to ensure a happy, healthy life on a planet that is viable, sustainable, free of pollutants and thriving with plants and wildlife? So my question is about plastics. And I think I made a comment in 1970 we were producing 50 million tonnes of plastics. Now 50 years later we're actually up to 440 million tonnes. I put in a comment about the Four Corners and Fairfax investigation, where industry experts like Waste Management of Australia President Gareth Lamb said there need to be guidelines ensuring councils and businesses prioritise recycled goods over virgin materials, or at least have their recycled material quotas. So he made a comment about glass and how it should be one of the easiest things to get right, because when glass is recycled, it's broken down into sand, yet we're still using virgin sand from quarries on our road bases rather than looking into recyclable products. So my question is, does Geelong City Council inquire about what recyclable products are out there and what they can utilise rather than using virgin products at a lesser cost? And then a separate question, I don't know if you want to do them separately or...
Oh, well, I've got a list here, so...
Sure, so it's up to you. I'm just asking the question.
Keep going.
Sure,
Thank
fine.
you.
Thank you. So does Geelong City Council put funds toward researching new areas of recycling? What plans does Geelong City Council have for the plastic dump site at Lara? And is Geelong City Council willing to embrace a bottle deposit scheme such as the German fan system? And my final question is, Geelong City Council willing to not only declare a climate emergency, but to embrace it and be leaders in our community? Thank you for your time.
Judith, I'll try and get through them. In a nutshell, I'll give the response as it is here to give that justice. The City has regularly audited recycling materials collected by its contractor and understands the types of materials likely to be found at contractor depots. The City assesses recycled content and environmental implications when purchasing materials. This includes considerations for increasing use of recycled content, increasing recycling of used material, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing waste to landfill and reducing water consumption. The City has invested and continues to invest in new areas of recycling, for example using rejected concrete railway sleepers for coastal erosion control works, and providing a new hard waste collection and resource recovery program, which has resulted in approximately 40% of material collected being recycled. The City also has a new recycling education in place, as well as a new plastic WISE program currently under development, which will audit existing plastic usage and identify opportunities to reduce use. The Lara dump site, Broderick Road site as we know it, is privately owned and is not a city contractor site. The EPA is undertaking a clean-up of this site, and that is a particular site that has caused considerable stress to the Geelong community, in particular the Lara community. This council fought it twice at VCAT to get it shut down, and we're fighting today to get that site cleaned up. This is a state government policy area. Sorry, this is in relation to the container deposit scheme. We're the only state in Australia that doesn't have it. Go figure. This is a state government policy area, and is the only state in Australia without at least a commitment to a container deposit scheme. The state government must catch up to the rest of the country by getting this vital measure off the ground as soon as possible. Evidence has shown that a container deposit scheme is a highly effective way to recoup plastic, aluminium and glass. We encourage the state to do this, and I've been on radio and in the press in recent times pushing that quite strongly. The container deposit scheme must come into Victoria. The last question, declaring a climate emergency, I think you'll find that is imminent, but that's a discussion that we're undergoing. And look, there are certain views on that, and they'll be discussed at the next council meeting here at the end of September. And I think you'll find that's when you'll get a full and open council view on where that might sit. All right. Yep, Councillor Grisbeck.
The container deposit scheme. So the Municipal Association of Victoria represents all 79 councils now, and they are speaking to the Minister every day about the container deposit scheme and how important it is. Every other state has it. So as a sector, we are advocating for it, and nearly every single council has signed up to the MAV that says that they want a container deposit scheme as well. So I'm hoping, with all of that pressure, that it won't be too long before that happens.
Fantastic.
Appreciate your questions. Thanks, Judith. Jacqueline Edge. Is Jacqueline with us this evening? Take her questions on notice. Jennifer Bantow, welcome.
Everyone. Just a little short preamble. I wanted to start on a positive note and congratulate the Council's UNESCO City of Design unit in Economic Development and Events, Economy, Investment and Attraction. Tim Ellis, Nerily Jones, Chris Silverstone and no doubt others for achieving a standalone Geelong Design Week program in 2020. I think that's great. So my first question is obviously about the former Geelong Post Office. And I can see that in the recommendation there's very strong attempts to make this as good as possible an outcome, but I think there's still some ambiguous language, and when a process is being started which will partly determine the vital outcome for this outstanding place. We've learnt recently when things are not clear in the beginning, the consequences can be expensive. So there's two words in this agenda item that concern me. One is because the property is to be sold conditional on the use and development of it being complementary to the overall precinct. And what's the meaning of complementary? It's different things to different people. The officer's report does say under 8.2 that uses and development are complementary to the overall project, including possible accommodation and tourism.
Is that your first question, Jennifer? I'm just trying to follow that.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I'm just trying to follow what's been said.
The question is about what the complementary uses are. Yep. So what's complementary are private apartments complementary? Are suites of offices complementary? Is a licensed nightclub or hotel complementary? The word needs to be made to be defined more clearly to imply are the proposed uses of the building when an expression of interest is made similar to the uses of other buildings in that precinct? In other words, are they arts, cultural and civic uses proposed in an expression of interest? Because that would be complementary. So I think the word complementary is too vague. And the second word that I think is too vague is the precinct. The recommendation just says the overall precinct. Well, what precinct are we talking about? There are three different precincts. There's the Arts and Cultural Precinct, which is a master plan which Council adopted in 2017, and that's a certain map. Then there's the precinct for the civic and cultural area in the planning scheme. Are we talking about that map, which is a different outline? Now the latest is the new civic precinct, so that's another area. So I think that's the terminology in the recommendation needs to be define what complementary means and define what precinct means. So that's the question. The question was, in a nutshell, how can Council decide to sell the post office when what are considered complementary uses are not clearly defined, and when the precinct and its objectives in which the post office is cited are not clearly defined in the recommendation?
I have an answer in my head, but I'm going to go to, I think it's Sean, our acting director, for that particular question. Well, in relation to the planning aspect, Gareth, can you help us with that? With a defining line around our arts and culture precinct.
Thanks for the question, Jennifer. And you are right, there's different ways of defining it. And we certainly, I know the team that have been looked at the process have looked at the what's in the planning scheme, and it is quite a more reduced version of it. So it certainly doesn't cover off the likes you're referring to, the hotels and nightclubs and the likes. It's very more restrictive about services are suitable, I guess, within that precinct. But I think it does require the work, and I'd have to take advice of the officers. I think if a council was to come with a resolution today, they have to help sharpen that up outside of the council chamber with the officers to define, so it's actually quite clear on any future tenders on. They actually do know what they're actually what the definition is, and then the actual extent of the area that we're talking about. So, agree.
Yes, so we're talking about the civic and cultural precinct in the Central Activity Centre, Precinct 4.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Not the arts and culture precinct in the master plan that was adopted. We're not talking about that one then?
No, we're not.
Right, that's quite a difference. Sorry.
I want to get that clarified, Gareth, if we could.
Yeah, the project officer here, through the mayor, you're not working within the actual tender documents, but the project officer is here that might be able to add to that conversation. Travis?
The arts and culture precinct is simply that one block.
We'll get some more information from our officer, Travis Kerr. Travis, could you come to a microphone or share with Jennifer or share with Rhonda?
Oh, there's that one. That one.
Time being, but we're going to work with Jim and others to make sure that we're capturing relevant, acceptable uses.
Good. Okay, well that's important because this includes the word civic and cultural. This is arts and cultural, so civic's a very important word because it means citizens' use.
Thank you. We'll take that into consideration, Jennifer. Thank you, Travis.
Will I go on to the second question?
I have a question here in relation to the Barwon River Parklands.
That's the third question.
Righto.
The second one is also to do with the post office, and it's to do with section 173. Part of it. Question 2, is Council satisfied that given the uncertainty of a section 173 agreement title encumbrance, the heritage values of the post office exterior and interior architectural significance will be permanently safeguarded? Is Council satisfied about that because parties can change a section 173 agreement at any time in the future with a stroke of a pen? It's not a permanent title encumbrance that lasts forever.
There'll be further discussion on that during the agenda discussion this evening on that.
Thank you. And is the Council satisfied that the entitlement of the public to use this asset, since it was given to the people of Geelong by the state government, will be possible if tonight's recommendation is passed? It's rhetorical. Is Council satisfied that it has correctly responded to its constituents who have expressed the opposite view to selling and have given expressions of strong social association of the post office with the Geelong region? And this has been 16 of the 17 have your say submissions are against selling it, 16 of the 17, and a strong majority vote of the Heritage Advisory Committee. The public want to keep this in public hands. It's a very strong expression of public views.
Be further comment and debate made in the agenda item tonight on that, Jennifer. Thank you.
And the third question was about the river, but I'll postpone that if you like.
You asked it the other week, actually.
Well, no, it's different.
Is it different? Sorry. Same but different? Right. Same river.
Same river.
Thanks, Jennifer. We'll take that for the next meeting then.
Yeah.
That ensures you'll be back.
Yes.
Thank you. Which we look forward to. Thanks, Jennifer.
See you in 2 weeks, Jennifer.
Maybe one day heritage won't be on the agenda.
Georgia Moore. Is Georgia here with us this evening? Georgia, yep, welcome.
Hi, my name's Georgia Moore and I'm a 21-year-old university student. Growing up, little did I know that at this age I'd find myself torn between my studies, trying to make an income for myself, and trying to save my own life and the life of 7.7 billion other people on this planet. Not to mention the some 50 million species of animals and 300,000 species of plant life recorded around the world. I'm affiliated with multiple groups in the Geelong community, including the local branch of the Greenpeace movement Break Free, the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, and Extinction Rebellion. So today, I don't stand here alone. This is the reality for so many other wonderful people in the community who are fighting for my future, for the future of their own children and grandchildren. And this is our burden, yet which is yet to be adequately shared by you, our representatives. So I have 3 questions for you this evening, and please bear with me if you don't mind. Mayor Harwood, at the last meeting you stated climate change is a problem we can't fix overnight. You said we're taking action and we're doing what we can, including the 2017 Zero Carbon Policy and Carbon Action Plan. With all due respect, however, this is not enough. These actions are not groundbreaking. These are not an adequate response to the existential threat that we are facing, and this is not emergency policy making. Council acknowledges expected sea level rise of up to 80 centimetres by 2100 on its website. This would see Barwon Heads and many other suburbs from Carryover Bay to the Bellarine inundated. Proposed Amendment C394 would see to apply land subject to inundation overlay to 1,614 properties in these areas. On your website, Councillor Jim Mason states this overlay recognises the location may be subject to future coastal flooding and sea level rise impacts. May be subject. This does not acknowledge the seriousness of this threat. Sea level rise is already happening and it's not a potential threat, it's inevitable. It's time Council start taking the risk of coastal inundation seriously, and the emergency of our situation is appropriately reflected by Council policy. I ask of you that in all future Council communications, motions, documents and policies, you only refer to this situation as what it is, a climate emergency or crisis. This is not climate change, this is a man-made existential time bomb. So my first question is, will you commit to telling the truth and calling this situation for what it really is, an emergency?
I'm not here to argue semantics this evening, but it will be discussed at our meeting in September.
Great. My second question. Mayor Harwood, at the last meeting you gave me a sense that you believe this is a state and federal issue, not capable of being addressed locally. What can one local council do? This was deeply disappointing to hear from my elected community leader. Yes, it's essential that we have strong, cohesive national policy, but our federal government is currently letting us down. Yes, it's vital we have ambitious state policy, state climate targets to push for federal accountability, but our state government is currently letting us down. 50% renewable energy by 2030, that's not good enough. At a local level, we must declare a climate emergency to influence change at a state level, to see stronger action on climate than the watered-down targets they have just committed to. Once the majority of states have declared a climate emergency, our political leaders might actually start pulling their weight and stop using excuses to avoid taking their dirty hands out of the deep pockets of the fossil fuel industry. It's Council's role as our local leaders to push for federal accountability from the bottom up. Together we are powerful, so join the movement, please, of over 35 local councils Australia-wide, including the Surf Coast, who are all empowering their electorates and are fed up with being voiceless. I call upon you to declare a climate emergency for bottom-up change and, most importantly, for our future. Will you stop being complicit with a federal government who thinks it's okay to take away my future and push for change?
As I say, this will be debated and discussed at the final meeting in September.
Councillor Atkin, at the last meeting you stated you weren't prepared to declare a climate emergency without being able to support it with meaning. I understand this and I appreciate this, but what you may not understand is that the longer you wait, the more you tap away at our hope. Many within our community feel hopeless, insignificant, overwhelmed and afraid. As our community leaders, it's imperative that you're leading the way, empowering the community, inspiring innovation and supporting education. Every time we ask and you don't deliver, it hurts. Every time my activist friends question why even bother, I feel despair. Every time the uninformed look down on me as alarmist or dramatic, I feel frustrated and angry. But how can I blame them when our own federal, state and local governments let us down by failing to recognise the emergency of our situation? If Council recognises this situation for what it is, an emergency, it will open the eyes of those who are currently blind with fear or hopelessness. Most importantly, it will give hope to those who are out there in the community, my friends, who are out there fighting and working tirelessly for all of our futures. It will make us feel supported, recognised and valued. And I truly feel this hope and sense of empowerment will be contagious. So my question to you is, will you take my future, if not your own children's future, seriously, by tabling discussion and a vote for a declaration of climate emergency at the next council meeting?
Questions come through the chair, and I'll just answer it succinctly insofar as we share this community with everybody else who's here tonight. We have a vested interest like everybody else. We have children and grandchildren. We take the environment seriously, and we've demonstrated that, and we'll continue that debate through to next month. Councillor, do you wish to make any comment? You don't have to, but if you wish to.
No, I don't mind. Look, I thank you. I mean, look, I love passion. I love youth that have passion, and I actually think that, as the Mayor's already indicated, we actually have made a commitment we're going to debate this issue at the next full council meeting, which will be in about 4 weeks' time. So the council agenda will have the item put on it. The method of that occurs, our preference at this point in time is that it is through the portfolio holder of environment. So it actually does on the basis that we're showing that we are committed to discuss this in a policy basis and understand the significance of it. And the only other point I might tell you is that, and it was pointed out to me today, I actually don't think we should be celebrating that we're identifying that there is an emergency in the climate. I think that's an absolute tragedy that we're in a state of emergency. And as a consequence, I actually think we do have to respond in an appropriate manner, and I'm looking forward to the public debate from this chamber on that particular debate in 4 weeks' time. And if you are available, I encourage you to come. And I am pleased that the comments you've made tonight have been listened to with respectfully by the councillors, and I've been really encouraged by the debate I've been seeing in the community over the last 4 weeks on this particular issue, to show the maturity of Geelong to actually deal with this issue in a respectful and responsible manner. And I think this council will make the right decision in 4 weeks' time.
In 4 weeks.
Okay. Thank you. Next question is from Cheryl Scott. Is Cheryl with us this evening? If not, I'll take her question on notice. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Cheryl.
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Cheryl Scott from the Osmond Park Association. I'd like to thank the councillors for the decision taken at the Community Focus meeting on the 13th of August not to release the Osmond Park Master Plan for public comment due to its shortcomings, and for requiring council officers not only to rescope the plan but to provide an interpretation plan for the property. This plan is an imperative next step, and with the recent and very welcome appointment of architect David Scott, no relation unfortunately, as Senior Heritage Planner for Council, the Osmond Park Association fully supports that he commence an interpretation plan immediately. I also thank Councillor Contell for his public statement as reported by Peter Moore in the Geelong Advertiser of last Friday, which shone brightly against the inaccuracies and attempted apparent humour of the rest of Mr Moore's claims and statements. I can assure you the Osmond Park Association never once held a macrame class of any kind, nor any neo-feminist era yoga classes, as he stated. For those not familiar with the Osmond Park Association, we are an umbrella group representing a number of community groups, and during our occupation of the east wing of Osmond House from 2010 to 2016, I advise that we did, however, generate sufficient funds from exhibitions and events to contribute $10,000 to the restoration of the 1910 Percy Everett Ballroom, which was accompanied by approximately 800 volunteer hours for the work involved. For the 2013 centenary of Australia's Royal Australian Naval College, established at Osmond House in 1913, we hosted the Chief of Navy, the Commander of the Australian Fleet, 7 Admirals, the Commanding Officers of HMAS Creswell and Cerberus, and the Engineering Cadets and Naval Band of HMAS Cerberus, plus members of the general public and descendants of the first 2 intakes of cadets. We hosted touring exhibitions from the Australian War Memorial and the Shrine of Remembrance. And last year, thanks to the support of this council, we hosted a garden party for the centenary of Armistice held in honour of World War I nurses who recuperated at Osmond House, which was Victoria's first Red Cross nurses' rest home from 1917 to 1919. During our tenancy, user groups to the East Wing exceeded 16,000 visitors. This figure does not include patrons to the exhibitions and events which were hosted regularly to present aspects of the history of Osmond Park in order to keep the community engaged with the property, which has now been without a designated future use for 26 years.
Carol, you seem to have drifted from where you were heading at the start with the questions. Are you able to...
It's coming.
Thank you.
Prior to its closure in December 2016, there were 14 community groups at Osmond Park, including sporting clubs, veterans groups, Rotary and a variety of community interest groups. Since inception in 1999, the objectives of the Osmond Park Association have been to keep the property in community ownership for the benefit and use of the community. Contrary to popular belief, the property is not and never was derelict, but was exactly as left when the Shire of Carryover ceased to exist. If it wasn't for the community groups, the property would no doubt be in a state of disrepair, since they were the reporters of roof leaks, maintenance issues, possums, squatters and vandalism. It is obvious then that the community has a vested interest in the future of Osmond Park, but we are not and never have been blind to the fact that there needs to be a commercial element to whatever future plan is devised. I have 3 questions relative to the Mayor's motion of the 13th of August. Would Council please define what is involved in rescoping the master plan and clarify which department of Council will now be undertaking the master plan process, since it apparently no longer sits with property procurement and asset management in the Customer and Corporate Services Department? The second question, please define how the community will now be addressed and involved in regards to rescoping the master plan. And number 3, according to tonight's agenda item 2, budget funding carryover under property and procurement and assets, there is $999,750,000 of the $1 million budget unused in Osmond House Remedial Works project, claiming it is subject to development of the master plan. Can Council explain why remedial works to the West Car Park drainage issues and restoration of windows in the Heritage Building cannot commence immediately, since these works are imperative, are required by the Lovelchen Conservation Management Plan and have no impact on the future use of the property? Neglect of these required works are causing greater damage and likely create a larger repair cost. Thank you.
Following the Council resolution on the 13th of August, the CEO has established a working group of senior officers from across the organisation to support the next stage of this project, which is rescoping of the Osmond Park Master Plan and developing the process for future community engagement. This cross-functional team will be led by our community life and planning departments. As the decision to rescope this project was only taken 14 days ago, officers are still considering the rescoping and process of future community engagement. Detail regarding the project rescoping and the process of future community engagement will be part of the discussion and workshop with councillors over the coming month or so, with a report brought to Council when there is a general consensus in respect to approach and expected outcomes. As the master plan has not been adopted, the prioritising of any future works will also be considered during the rescoping exercise and be considered as part of the report to Council.
Sorry, did I miss the bit about the community involvement in the rescoping?
No, and there will be a workshop with councillors over the coming months or so with a report to Council when there will be a general consensus in respect to approach and expected outcomes. So there will be further discussion taking place. As the master plan has not been adopted, the prioritising of future works will also be considered during the rescoping exercise and be considered as part of the report to Council.
The workshop will include community members.
Detail regarding the project rescoping and the process of future community engagement will be part of the discussion. You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to present a petition to Council to keep Geelong's iconic former post office for community use. May I speak to the petition?
We're really here for questions. Lex, as you are well aware, I see you have you have 3 or so questions lodged, and they're quite long and detailed. So there is also a opportunity after this to present the petition.
After question time.
We don't take commentary on petitions. We just take they're being presented.
Okay. So my questions. Council's appointed Heritage Advisory Committee last week voted to advise Council that it should keep the post office for the vision that it supports the Arts and Culture Precinct, the Clever and Creative Futures Plan 2017, the Council Plan 2018-22 priorities, and the Heritage Strategy. It also plainly supports the principles expressed in those Council documents. Committee's advice is not mentioned in the report preceding the recommendation to proceed with the sale. My first question is, why is it not mentioned?
The report was deferred from the Council meeting on the 9th of July 2019 and therefore had to be submitted to this meeting unchanged.
Mr. Mayor,
sorry, Councillor Mason.
if I could just assist there,
Yep.
It will be in the amendment. It will be noted.
Our council, the second question, our council plan, putting our community first, advocates for a more inclusive and diverse community, growing our tourism and events, informed social infrastructure and planning, planned sustainable development, vibrant arts and culture, a thriving and sustainable economy. These pretty much tie in with the UNESCO City of Design aims. The vision of repurposing the former post office would support all of the above. It can be achieved if innovative services and technology are successfully applied to examining our budget to fund future initiatives. Budget overruns of 5% are mentioned in the Council Plan Update 2019-20. It's plain that in a budget the size of Council's, the cost of refurbishing and running the post office could easily be met from greater internal efficiency. Can Council encourage its departments to increase their efficiency by even 1% to fund the forward-looking initiative of repurposing the post office?
This is a matter that we'll be discussing this evening, Lex. There'll be further discussion and debate about that when that item comes up. And we'll consider the points made during this, during your commentary there, and the decision will be made later in the agenda.
Right. Council actions to date. We understand that no Council department has any interest in the post office project, despite accepting the UNESCO Sustainability Goals 11 and 12, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable, and ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. There are more meanings to sustainable than just economic sustainability. Council departments are like separate fiefdoms. The modern term for them is silos, which guard against threats from other silos within Council or from outside Council's gates. The proposal that Council retain and refurbish the post office is a threat to the resources of each department, so they advise Council that there are no resources. This Council has discussed the post office extensively, funded a comprehensive conservation management plan which will help to protect it, sought to ensure that expressions of interest will have purposes that complement the arts and culture precinct. Could I just emphasise there that 9.3.1, which speaks about complementary purposes, is misspelt complement, and that is another point of ambiguity in that recommendation.
Mr. Mayor, that's corrected.
Thank you. The post office represents another major opportunity, like Osmond House, to appreciate civic contributions from the past, from the building investment in 1894 to Geelong citizens subscribing for the 1911 clock to its commemorative plaques. There is also a moral question. In 1994, the state government gave council funds to buy the jail and the post office, plus $60,000 to refurbish the jail. Commissioner Dix, who was then in charge, asked for the $60,000 to be able to support conversion of the post office to house our historical records centre, but it seems to have been applied to installing unsympathetic office partitions, and the council had free use of the office space for over 20 years, which is hardly community use. The state government has forgiven the $1.03 total million loaned to council for the jail and the post office. Selling the jail has already given the council a profit that will in part be spent on Osmond Park. The balance, essentially free, could be wisely spent on making community use of the post office a reality. Council needs to heed its moral obligations and the will to achieve the vision of repurposing the post office for community use, supporting a social history museum and community cultural development on a grand scale. A wide range of people support keeping it in public hands and adapting it for modern use. I consider that the council is entitled to hope that it would be represented in this matter by its elected councillors. My question is, in the light of this petition from over 1,100 people and the accompanying comments, the comments are in here with them, and the advice of Council's Heritage Advisory Board, are you prepared to listen to your community and vote to retain the former post office for community use? Actions needed if Council voted to retain and refurbish the post office would be to involve local organisations. This is obviously an issue with Osmond Park as well. To talk to other organisations which need central space for community-based activities, set up a representative steering committee, and that's representatives from the organisations for the project, and later a board of management, undertake a business plan to support the above, and support fundraising to augment council funds. Council would then be visibly supporting its cultural community, the UNESCO City of Design and UNESCO's sustainability goals, the council plan, the Clever and Creative Futures 30-year plan, and the economy by creating a vibrant creative space for visitors that reflects our community culture, design and architectural excellence. On behalf of all petitioners represented here, thank you for receiving this petition and accompanying comments.
Thank you for your questions and comments tonight, Lex. Obviously, there'll be further discussion later this evening when the agenda item is up for discussion. Yeah,
Is there?
If that could be, where's Jake? No. It's going to collect that.
Thank you.
Ian Ewell. Is Ian with us this evening? Thank you, Ian.
Yes, Ian Yule's my name, the President of the Geelong Interchurch Social Justice Network. And thank you very much for your attention at the last meeting where I asked a similar question. And I see from the minutes that you're certainly doing a lot of individual things to combat climate change. However, Council seems to be reluctant to declare that we are facing a climate change emergency. Now, it's not. I'm not being pedantic here. Words are really important. And as an English teacher for 50 years, I can tell you, right, words are important.
The thing is as well too, I try to tell our CEO regularly.
And the fact is that if we use the term emergency, we inject a sense of urgency into tackling the issue, because an emergency needs emergency measures to counteract it. So I really commend this to Council's attention. Our planet's facing irreversible climate change, and unfortunately in Australia our emissions are still increasing. So in anyone's language, this is an emergency, and that requires emergency measures. So will the Council make the declaration and take the system-wide steps needed to counteract it without further delay? I really identified with the university student statement, actually. She reminded me of my granddaughter, who was talking to me about this and is helping to organise the student strike on the 20th of September. So I identified with her statement.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
As has been stated, there'll be a broader discussion on the last Tuesday of September. And I think there'll be far more will be discussed and cleared up on that particular day.
If it's good enough for the House of Commons over in Britain, I'm sure it won't be a problem with our council. Thank you.
Sir. That concludes questions that were forwarded. It's an opportunity for those who haven't had a chance to ask a question to come forward, and I've got a couple, so I've got 3 to get through, so we'll start down the front if you'd like to. Thank you. And then everyone will get a chance at some stage to go with Joan. Okay. Good evening, Joan.
My name is Joan Lindros. I'm from the Geelong Environment Council. The subject of my question, of course, is the post office. I'll state the obvious for a couple of sentences. Geelong, and people are saying this to me in regard to the post office, Geelong has only one post office. Are we going to get rid of it? Move it on. We had a lot of heritage buildings in the past. Most of them have gone. Some of them have been used. We see in other towns too where some heritage buildings have been changed to other uses and where the heritage overlays and the conditions have not been effective. So I don't think we can think that the post office will be protected by what we think are heritage protections, because they seem to be very easily got about. And I'm speaking about some important buildings at Queenscliff just nearby with very strict, apparently, conditions, however, not always effective. The environment and other social and community groups in Geelong, and there are a number, have got no actual home. Sporting groups and the committees that support them, and we support them too, do have somewhere. They usually have places on the sporting grounds, offices and all sorts of other facilities. Just normal community groups don't have this. I see the post office, if it could be retained for a couple of years until a little bit more thought and maybe opportunity arises, who knows what's going to arise, was contained within the city. It could be used as a community hub for community groups, for museums, for some some economic use, and I think we're selling it at the wrong time, and I'm going to ask the reason. Why cannot Council hold on to the post office? It's not going to blow away. It's not going to crumble down. Keep it for a couple more years, and something could easily crop up, and we don't want to be sitting here thinking in 2 years' time, God, I wish we still had the post office. That would have been great. So that is my question. Why cannot we decide to keep it for a period of time, who knows how long, and wait a little bit longer and work a bit harder to perhaps find a mixture of uses with some that will pay some money back. It hasn't been purchased for a huge sum and that we've got to move on quickly. I believe that we've lost so much that this is an opportunity we must not miss. So my question is, why not keep it? Thank you.
That'll be discussed shortly.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah, my name's Charles Cameron from South Geelong. It might be common practice in local government for these occasions to occur, but to me it's inherently lost the word. Anyhow, it's really great that that people like myself can be here and inherently civilised. This occasion is inherently civilised. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and your fellow councillors. I'm also here to talk about the former Geelong Post Office. There's been an historical trend in this state, perhaps in this country, whereby public assets, typically churches and schools, that have been subscribed, partly subscribed to or fully subscribed to by the local community, get flogged off. That to me is a great shame, and it really, there's a certain lack of morality in that situation. My own high school is one such thing. It no longer exists. Got done away with by a previous government. Anyhow, when we come to the former Geelong Post Office, there's a plaque at the base of the clock tower, and I'd like to read to you what it says on that plaque. Many of you may well be familiar with it. The clock and chimes in this tower were subscribed for in the year 1910 by the citizens of Geelong and District to commemorate the illustrious reign of the late beloved sovereign King Edward VII, who reigned 1901 to 1910. So a whole lot of people parted with their coins and whatever on that occasion to build that, to install that clock and to get it going. And it would be a great shame if it was to leave the public domain, for it to go into private hands. That is my statement. Thank you very much.
Else? Yes, sir.
Councillors, my name is Dr Lloyd Owen. I'm a resident of Geelong. I am a volunteer with the National Trust. But I had the pleasure of working in the old post office for some years, in recent years, where we developed, designed, researched and incubated a program which is known as the Geelong Project, and which has become an amazing example of collective impact on providing early intervention for youth at risk of homelessness and other social ills. And in spite of huge odds, almost impossibilities, and lots of difficulties and hassles about funding, part of which was a rescue from the Lord Mayor of Melbourne's fund. We managed to incubate and implement the Geelong project. We've struggled along. It's been operating in 3 schools in Geelong, high schools. It's now been expanded to another, or to 7 schools altogether, with funding from the government. It's been picked up interstate and internationally in UK, Canada and the USA on the collective impact model. So I guess the old post office has done something in its recent years that are consistent with the creative and clever community that we aspire to be. I guess I fell in love with the place whilst I was working with it. But, and today, only today, did I become aware of the fact that the Council has just appointed a new heritage officer whose credentials I heard about today, and I was very impressed. And my question then is, given that the Council is just now putting in place new organisational arrangements for heritage management, might it not be premature to dispose with the public ownership of such an iconic Geelong landmark as the old post office? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Owen. Are there any more questions, or there's one up the back there? Yep, thank you. Might be the last one. Let's see how we go. Good evening.
So my name's Tina Thorburn, and I'm still calling on Council to declare and act upon a climate emergency. I've attached my previous 2 submissions to this one just so you've all got them to refer to. Okay, so as of tonight, there are now 39 jurisdictions across Australia who have declared a climate emergency, which is 7 more than when our last interaction 2 weeks ago. That is 39 jurisdictions representing almost 15% of Australia's population. When last we spoke, I mentioned the wildfires in the Arctic Circle. Now we're being made aware of the devastating fires in the Amazon as well as the Congo. The world is on fire. It is not a metaphor. And we need to make every change possible to halt runaway climate change. Between the Siberian fires, the Amazon fires and the Congo fires, our world's largest land-based carbon sinks are not only spewing megatons of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, but they now have significantly reduced capacity to create the oxygen we need to survive. These areas are often referred to as the lungs of our planet. So I'd like to, in light of this, ask you to consider the behaviours of addicts, specifically smokers and gamblers. Every smoker knows that cigarettes are harmful and doing damage to their lungs and bodies, yet for some reason they keep smoking. They know they will eventually have to give up this addiction or most likely die from smoking-related consequences, and yet they continue to smoke, not really believing that their next cigarette will be the one to tip the balancing point, thinking there will be time to make the change and rectify the damage. In comparison, look at what we are doing to our lungs, our trees. We are logging our forests and burning them. We are clearing trees to make way for roads and new housing developments. Clearly, we don't believe the next tree will be the one to tip the balancing point, even though we know every tree destroyed is doing damage. Similarly, problem gamblers are aware of the consequences of their addiction on themselves and their families, but there is always that next bet that will turn it all around. One more bet, one more win, everything will be okay. It's all about the dollars. Now look to our own municipality. Let's just build one more house or shopping complex, but it's not one more house, it's hundreds of houses in one more housing development. Except there are plans for several more housing developments. Land and trees will be cleared, concrete poured, choking the land, and sadly, who knows how much synthetic turf will be laid because it's convenient. With the gambler, we know the real winners will be the casino or the bookie or the pokie venue, not the gambler or the people for whom he or she may be responsible. None of us here this evening are motivated to save the planet by financial gain. We just want a future. We want our children to have a future. Now, more than ever, we need our council's help to protect us from those in our midst who are willing to continue to destroy our lungs and gamble with our lives and those of our children for that next big financial win under the guise of just one more development.
Tina, do you have a question?
It's time to quit smoking. It's time to stop gambling. It's time to declare a climate emergency. And no, it's just a submission, not a question.
Okay, thank you for your submission. In question time. Okay. Last call for questions, so I think we've had a pretty good go this evening. So
Only, please, Mr. Mayor.
that's okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Petitions, I think we've had one presented this evening. Are there any more petitions to be presented?
These haven't we, or was that an old petition?
Sorry, Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've received a petition from Break Free Geelong. There's 1,589 signatures on this to date, although my understanding is that they are continuing to collect signatures calling on Council to declare a climate emergency. So we have received that petition and I'll be tabling that tonight. I just wanted to add that firstly I want to thank all the people who've raised this evening. This is an issue I have been working on quite hard for some time. It's something that I personally share your passion for, and I'm foreshadowing that I'll be bringing a notice of motion forward to Council on the 24th of September at our meeting, as has been mentioned, asking for Councillor support to declare a climate emergency, and the detail of that will be in the notice of motion and discussed on the night. I would have liked to bring something forward earlier, but this is an issue where it's really important we try and bring everyone along with us. We've seen examples in other councils where notices of motion have been brought forward quickly, and we look at the case of Wagga where it was rescinded 2 weeks later. So I think every effort needs to be made to try and make sure everyone's been at least attempted to bring everyone on board. We have had councillors on leave. We still have a councillor on leave, and the council group was of agreement that we should have all councillors present for such an important vote, which will be the case on the 24th of September. There are also a number of councillors who wanted some more time to consult directly with their community about this issue. And so I would really encourage anyone who has feelings about this particular matter to get in touch with their councillors and explain how they, explain their views and share them with the council group. But we will be hearing more about it at our meeting on the 24th of September here in the council chamber. So,
Councillor Mansfield will accept that petition. Now, just before we move on to the Section B reports, I just want to take a quick moment just to acknowledge the passing of Jordan Mavros the other day, and just pay my respects to the work that was done by Jordan over a long period of time, and just offer, on behalf of the City of Greater Geelong, our condolences to the Mavros family. Jordan was one of the instrumental people in relation to the Geelong Ethnic Community Council going back some time, which later became Diversitat, which is a well-known organisation dealing with our multicultural community and beyond. He was also chair of the Give Where You Live Foundation, and was also a founder of the Multi-Aged Care Services group out in North Geelong. So a very deeply committed community person, and did fantastic work over many, many years, and has left a very, very strong legacy in Geelong. So we just pay our respects to Jordan Mavros and the work he did while he was engaged in our community. Section B reports. Our first report this evening is the future of the former Geelong Post Office. Moved Councillor Mason and seconded Councillor Manane. Thank you, Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have an amendment, and I think it's being displayed on the screen now. And before I speak to the amendment, I'd just like to say a few things about the questions. I do hope that I can answer most of those questions tonight as I speak, but noting that Mr. Campbell used the word civilised, I'd like to thank everybody involved. This has really been quite a long marathon, and we've all worked together, both community, Heritage Advisory Committee and officers. And we've been striving to find a solution. And I thank everybody for their restraint and civilised behaviour during all of this. I also want to thank Mrs. Banto, who I recognise as an advocate and an educator. And tonight she might have mentioned one or two things that I'll try and answer. But it was Mrs. Banto who alerted me in the first instance about the need for improving our conservation management plan about a year ago. However, going to the amendment itself, I'd like you to note in 9.1, we have noted that we will include taking note of the advice from the Heritage Advisory Committee on Wednesday the 21st of August 2019. I'll talk to that in a moment. But as far as Dr. Lloyd Owen's concerned, I think his comments might cover quite a few of the previous comments, including Mrs. Chalmers. Thank you, Lex. And I'd just like to say, through all of our work and discussions, there is no moral or statutory heritage imperative for public ownership. Private ownership is allowable in the moral and statutory interpretations of the word heritage. And I think that if you consult any sophisticated planner, they will agree with that. Further, Mrs. Banto's question about complementary uses. Ultimately, this will be defined. In our earlier discussions with the officers, we have understood that during the expressions of interest, this word complementary will be further defined, and it is related to civic and cultural. In all of the papers, it says civic and cultural, not arts and cultural. And that is related actually to the planning scheme. So I believe that this will be more carefully defined. In addition, the council, it will come back to this chamber, and the councillors ultimately will define what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So there are many protections, but ultimately anything that comes up as a recommendation will come back to this chamber. Perhaps I'll just talk to the amendment itself now. Certainly the amendment strengthens the intent of the original motion and considers inputs since the extraordinary Heritage Advisory Committee was held last Wednesday. The intent remains that the intent was to further solicit sustainable solutions which may exist in the private or NGO sectors. I emphasise private or NGO, while permanently protecting the heritage value of the post office and complementing the intrinsic nature of the civic and cultural sectors, and to conform to the council strategies and plans. So I would like to point out too that this original motion, this original recommendation was to come up 6 weeks ago, and councillors decided to defer it for 6 weeks so that it could be held in this chamber while it's being publicly streamed and recorded, and so that it would be much more convenient for the stakeholders in the city. And so also it provided the opportunity for a Heritage Advisory Committee meeting last week.
Now, that Heritage Advisory Committee resolved that the council should keep the post office in public hands. It was a 6-3 vote, but it was a very strong position that the post office should be kept in public hands. And in the support of the vision of supporting the Arts and Culture Precinct, the Clever and Creative Plan 2017, the Council Plan 2018-22 priorities, and the Heritage Strategy. So I'll put it to you now and later that the vision put by the Heritage Advisory Committee is consistent also with other solutions. It's not just consistent with keeping it in public hands. I'll talk to that a little bit further later. At that meeting, a number of questions were asked, as similar questions as were asked tonight. And one of the questions is about the Section 173. This Section 173 will be applied to any sale, and it means that something like a covenant, it will be applied to the title. And as I received advice from the Heritage Advisory Committee last week, we've added the word responsible authority. The council is the responsible authority, and in perpetuity, when the 173 is applied as a covenant to the title, the council retains its authority over this, over the behaviour of whoever the owner might be, and therefore the conservation management plan will protect that building. Many other questions were asked, and I'd just like to point out one, that there was a very strong opinion that the arts and cultural uses generally in the community don't receive the same amount of funding as sports and recreational activities. Now, it's my duty, I was the chair of that meeting, and I'm making a point that there were quite a lot of strong points made about keeping the post office in public hands, but there were many other questions which I think we resolved, many of them, but as we go on we might answer most of those questions. Other than the public ownership, which I think we've come to a point where we can't show any sustainability. Nobody has been able to show at this meeting tonight, at the HAC meeting last week, where the sustainability might lie. So this amendment supports the vision, and the various documents that have been mentioned tonight, the Clever and Creative document, our council plan, these two documents. Inside those documents, we're also required to think outside the square. We're required to attract creatively oriented and artistic industries into the region. And we're required to creatively reuse heritage assets. So this motion provides opportunities for the private sector and opportunities for donors and philanthropists to offer support for community-based organisations to buy or lease in conformity with the CMP. Now, this has been quite a long saga. It's been going on for 15 years. And until this point, there's been no solution brought forward by any community group that's sustainable. I'd just like to go through a little bit of history. It's a matter of public record, but just to very quickly remind everybody. At its meeting on the 22nd of May last year, Council gave its notice of intention to sell the former Geelong Post Office and refer its conservation management plan to the Heritage Victoria and National Trust for comment. As a result, in 2018, Council then resolved to commission another conservation management plan, as I mentioned before, and that the proposed sale of the property be considered by the Council when the new conservation management plan became available. In April this year, the Council reviewed a new conservation management plan and resolved for officers to seek feedback on the use and ownership of the building. This included community submissions seeking feedback about options for the use and ownership, exploration of private-public partnerships, identification of available grants and philanthropists, and sale, tender and expression of interest processes. From that, we received 17 submissions, and this is the point at which we're almost at now. I was particularly interested in many of these submissions, and I hope that many of the aspirations in these submissions live on. Some of these submissions indicated that we should showcase Geelong's scientific, historical and cultural collections, that there could be a combination of hot desks and small, medium or large office accommodation, providing a shared space where start-up, home-based and micro-businesses might occur. Could be for, as mentioned tonight, tourist information, community and museum display. The James Harrison collection, as mentioned tonight by Mr Hobbs. And the Geelong's history of design excellence. So many interesting and wonderful projects. They do not have to be necessarily correction. They all have great merit and are highly commendable. But none of these showed any plan for financial sustainability. There are still opportunities for many of these in the proposed expressions of interest and leasing possibilities. Perhaps a philanthropist or another donor might see the opportunity to finance the National Trust or another NG ownership. That opportunity still exists after tonight, if this amendment's passed. In one sense, I want to emphasise, the buildings will always remain in public hands. The rule of law lies in the public realm. The Conservation Management Plan applied to Section 173 will lie in this realm. The Post Office is not being thrown into a lawless wilderness, a wild west. It will always lie in the realm of public protection.
Councillor Mason, I'm just conscious of the sensitivity of the motion, but also the time thus far.
I'm sorry, Mr Mayor, so perhaps I have been talking too long.
Well, not too long, but I'm just conscious that...
Yeah, I'm coming to the end of this.
All right, thank you.
There is no high moral principle or statute in our society which requires universal public ownership. So, in the end, in the work that I've done over the last 2 years, I have found no durable appetite within the City of Greater Geelong, which includes the arts and culture, to provide a creative and viable solution for the Post Office. I've found no durable appetite within the arts and culture precinct, specifically no durable appetite within the Geelong Regional Library and Heritage Corporation, none within GPAC and none within the Geelong Gallery. I've found no durable appetite from the G21 Arts and Culture Pillar. No significant grants have been identified and no financial sustainable private-public partnership has been identified. So we look at the amendment. And you can see there's been considerable work done in the last week or two to improve the current recommendation. I think in 9.1 we've noted that advice from the Heritage Advisory Committee has been received. In 9.2 we've noted that we didn't provide details of how the proposals would be financially sustainable. In 9.3a, we've mentioned civic and cultural precinct and consistent with the Conservation Management Plan Level Chen 2019. In 9.3b, we've added the word sale or lease. And if the property is to be sold in 9.3c1, we've added the words with the responsible authority, as was recommended by the Heritage Advisory Committee. In 9.3c2, we've added market valuation of the property rather than the other words. And other changes have just been tightening the English in terms of how the property is to be leased, and so there's no cost to the council. Ultimately, in 9.4 and 9.5, the CEO is to come back to us with the recommendations for council to make further decision. So, Mr Mayor, I commend the motion, the amendment.
Councillor Mason. Councillor Manane. Thank you, Councillor Manane. Other councillors to make comment or speak on the agenda item? Sorry. Mr Contel, thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I agree with just about everything that Jim or Councillor Mason mentioned. It wouldn't matter who was sitting around this chamber tonight. This would be a challenging decision to make either way. I've been on council since 2010. This matter has come up, I can't remember on how many occasions. I should have actually gone and had a look at how many reports have been put forward. And I don't think I've seen anyone work on it as extensively as Councillor Jim has. And I know that it has torn him, and I know that even tonight, when he puts the motion forward, that he has struggled with the decision-making, as have I. And we've worked collectively to the best of our ability to try and do a good job in these types of, with these types of issues. And Osmond House is an example of that, which we have been fighting hard to try and get the best possible outcome for the community. We're not experts, none of us. We try and get the best information that we can. And I have immense respect for the people that are in this chamber and people that are outside of it that have guided us along the way. And we're going to need more guidance. And we're going to need more of your help to try and come up with good outcomes. And there will be people after this vote that will be upset with us, and there will be others that may be in favour, and there will be others that will be neutral. But all of you have seen the struggles that we've had with Osmond House, and it hasn't stopped. We've still got a hell of a lot of work to try and get a great outcome for the community on that asset. Looking at that and experiencing Osmond House over the last 8 or 9 years, I'm really fearful, unless we try something different with the post office, we're going to start to see similar outcomes to what we've got with Osmond House, which is a neglected property, as Cheryl Scott rightly said and rightly put. And I don't believe the council has the capacity or even the capabilities to do everything, and to do everything to the liking of all community members. What we need to try to do is find an appropriate outcome for the post office with the guidance that we have within this room. And whilst I'd like to sit here and say, well, the only way to do that is through public ownership, I'm just not sure if it's the best outcome for the post office going forward. I actually tend to somewhat agree with some of the comments that were made in the Geelong Addy today, that unless we do something different with the post office, I think it's going to sit there for years to come. And I know there's been some encouragement tonight to let it sit for another couple of years, but I'm really fearful that just by sitting here and having opportunities put to us, I'm not sure if we're going to ever be courageous enough to do anything with them. and I think we'll continue to spin our wheels. And I'm frightened. I'm frightened of how I'm going to vote tonight because of the people that I see in the chamber and the respect that I have for them. But I know that if we don't make some sort of commitment to do something different, and I'll use mechanical terms as I have in the past, to take this off top dead centre, then we are going to continue to neglect this building and we won't find a way forward. You have to help us find that right outcome, but maybe wrapped in a different cloth to actually just owning it as a council asset. And if we can partner with the right tenants or owners, we still can get a good outcome. Today doesn't have to be the end of the post office. Today can be the start. And whilst I don't know these guys that well, some of them I've only been with for a couple of years, I can tell you that the intent is to try to do the right thing. None of us want to just flog this off. There's no gain in it for us personally. And even financially, there's not a lot of gain in it for us as a council. What we really are trying to do is to find the right outcome. And many of you know me reasonably well. My intent is genuine, to try and have a good outcome for the post office. I love the building. I love its heritage to Geelong. But I'm frightened that if we just continue to sit on this asset, that it will end up being sold off in perhaps a less favourable position than what Councillor Mansfield has put forward. Mason, I apologise. Mason has put forward. Because in a year's time, there will be a different council here, regardless of what anyone thinks. There will be different councillors around this chamber, and the mood and intent can be very different. I've been on 3, and I know how that changes. So I think the opportunity for us here with this group is to actually try and get a good outcome with real, genuine intent. And I applaud Councillor Jim for the work that he's done. He's laboured to try to get the words right. Someone said words are important tonight with a number of things. Jennifer Banto mentioned the wording. It's hard. When you're sitting here, you're trying to get the words reasonably right. But believe me, if someone wants to turn that word around, it won't matter what we write in this document. It'll be turned round. What you have to try to do is, I think, is try and put some faith in us as councillors. And if we see it coming off the rails and you see it coming off the rails, pull us up, bring us back to attention like you have with Osmond House. And as a team, we will try and make sure that we continue to keep things on the right track. But I think what Councillor Jim has put forward here is, I hate to say, a good first step, given that it is about 15 years. You're right, Jim. But if we can try and get some momentum with this and get this recommendation solid and have some great positive and meaningful discussions with our officers, I still think there can be a good outcome. I apologise to those who I'll let down tonight by perhaps not achieving what you would have liked of me personally, but I do think what Jim has put forward is a good compromise, and you may not appreciate that, but I think it's a way forward.
Councillor Contell, who else to speak? Councillor Murray.
Yeah, I think, look, before speaking on the motion, I want to thank Councillor Contell, but also especially want to thank Councillor Mason for his dedication and passion on this matter. Jim, I'm sure you've endured some sleepless nights over this and agonising over the right thing to do. But we are where we are tonight, and we're aware that the Heritage Advisory Committee passed a motion last week that Council should keep the post office in public hands with a vision that supports the Arts and Cultural Precinct and Clever and Creative Plan 2017 and Council Plan 2018 to 22 priorities and heritage strategy. I understand why the Heritage Advisory Committee would pass such a motion. I understand why a petition exists with over 1,100 signatures that supports that motion. The matter tonight has been delayed a number of times, and as Councillor Mason has said, it's been a marathon. It's been delayed a number of times to exhaust all possible scenarios possible for the post office. including trying to find an alternative use for the building, financial information, operational costs, maintenance and restoration. I think we are to support this motion tonight for the post office sale or lease. We have to be confident that the statutory protections that can be provided to the building, including state protection through the Victorian Heritage Register and Heritage Victoria, local protection through Heritage Overlay and the Greater Geelong Planning Scheme, contract of sale provisions, and a Section 173 agreement that will enforce the Conservation Management Plan. Legal advice indicates these protections are the best available and enforceable mechanisms to protect the building. So I am confident of these protections. Also confident that the private sector, with the right protections, may have more capacity to protect the building than if it continues to stay in public ownership, and that this option should be tested. And hence I'm supportive of the amended motion before us.
Councillor Murray, other speakers? Councillor Aiken.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Look, I have a principal opposition to the sale of public assets unless it can be demonstrated that it actually is in the public interest. And I actually don't think it has passed that particular test. It hasn't been demonstrated why this asset should be sold. Essentially what we're saying is we're rewarding the landlord for being apathetic for the last 25 years. You know, the apathy of the organisation is that there is no, as Councillor Mason has actually articulated to us, there is no willingness amongst the bureaucracy to actually try to find a clever and creative solution. There doesn't appear to be a uniform willingness amongst the council group to try to find a clever and creative solution to this issue. But what is important, we do have to acknowledge Councillor Mason's work. Essentially, we've got two models that we're looking at in terms of the post office. We either could have gone down the path of the Bendigo post office model, which is on a community basis is recognised as an iconic, clever and creative solution to actually preserve a heritage building and continue its relevance in the local community. We could have gone down the City of Melbourne model, which was to support the bastardisation of the Melbourne General Post Office, which its heritage values aren't protected in the model that was actually finally presented. And the significance of what Councillor Mason's actually presented tonight is essentially he is saying that, well, we're not going to follow the Bendigo model. We're not going to follow the Melbourne model, in fact. We're going to create the Geelong model. And the Geelong model is, we have spent the last year and a half trying to shore up the conservation management plan to protect the heritage value of that particular building. And Councillor Mason has done a tremendous amount of work to educate a bureaucracy that doesn't respect heritage buildings and has only just started to provide the intellectual resources in the organisation to respond to its heritage values. And that's been recognised by the community tonight with the appointment recently of David Stott. And as a consequence, Councillor Mason has actually led that change internally in the organisation, dragging this reluctant, apathetic landlord to understand its responsibilities in heritage. And what Councillor Mason's actually doing tonight is that the organisation was adamant that their recommendation was to sell the post office. And what Councillor Mason has actually presented before the community and the council is to say, well, there are other models that could be considered. And those other models are a possible lease model as well. And that does give the opportunity for the broader community, whether they are private or public, to actually look at a leasing model to come back to us. And if that leasing model does embrace some of the positions that have been presented by the heritage community, it may well stack up as the best option that the council should consider when it comes back. So Councillor Mason has attempted to try and find a solution that is a compromise and a consensus position. Has it demonstrated that the public interests have been served to sell this asset? No, it hasn't. But what Councillor Mason has tried to do is to be a statesperson and actually understand the significance of the iconic nature of this building and try and find a solution that actually gives the community an opportunity to seek and fulfil its aims and ambitions about this asset. So the resolution tonight to either consider sale or lease still does give the community an opportunity to try and seek that funding and seek those opportunities to create a financially sustainable model for this building, and try and address some of the apathetic positioning that has occurred by the council, administration and organisation over this heritage asset. I mean, we had the example tonight with the Geelong project. They would still be in that building, but the officers actually terminated their leases. So, in fact, the building would have tenancy in it if it wasn't through the ambition of the officers to actually make sure that the building was vacated for the primary purpose of sale. And so, Councillor Mason, thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for being a statesperson on this particular issue. I don't think you've delayed this issue at all. I actually think you've tried to find an acceptable solution, and what you're putting up tonight is one more attempt to try and give the community the opportunity to be able to develop a community-led solution for this proposal under the lease model, and it will be able to be judged about sale models, which essentially is the open market and competitive process. And I do hope through the leadership of the CEO that if there are any lease opportunities that are brought forward, they are judged in a proper process against any sale models, to embrace the work that you've done over the last 2 years and the ambitions of the community as well too. So I will be supporting the motion as well too, even though it does not reach my principal position of only selling public assets that can be demonstrated that it's in the public interest to do that. Councillor Mason.
Yes, Councillor Aiken, any other comments to be made? For Councillor Mansfield, yep.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'd just briefly like to add my thanks to Councillor Mason for all the work that he's put in on this issue. As has been stated, I know that he did everything he could to find a different outcome, I think, to the one we've been presented with. And I am also quite torn about this, because I certainly appreciate the value of keeping wonderful assets like this in public ownership. And as one of the newer councillors here, I think I can't speak for the other councillors, but I was certainly surprised at the number of heritage buildings we're carrying that are in a similar sort of situation, where over many years they'd reached a state where it's become incredibly hard for us to find a way to continue to maintain them to the standard that the community would really expect, and that shows respect for those buildings. I don't believe that that's through any kind of deliberate conspiracy or even deliberate neglect. I think a confluence of factors have led to this, and it's an unfortunate situation. But I do believe that, as Councillor Contell said, there's some really good intent around the council table here, and we are all very motivated to get the best outcome we can for the community. I'm heartened to see that leasing is an option here, and would love to see someone come forward. It does leave open that possibility that we can at least retain ownership of the building, but we need to see whether something viable will appear with respect to that. But certainly this has been a really difficult issue for a lot of us, and I thank Councillor Mason for putting such a considered notice of motion forward.
Mansfield. If there's no further comments, I'll go to Councillor Manane to speak.
Thank you. The matter very thoroughly, so I won't repeat all of that. Just to make some notes for myself tonight, and my first note was to recognise Councillor Jim's both the enormous amount of work he's put into this and his passion. So, Jim, I think it's well recognised by everybody what you've done on this matter, and I do think it's with a heavy heart that you do arrive at this conclusion, and I do think you also harbour some dream that something's going to come out of the woodwork and a left field solution might be found, and I'm sure you've got that harboured away somewhere. Look, yeah, we could have done what Bendigo did, but we probably needed to do it 10 years ago. A similar situation, Bendigo did a fantastic job with their jail with a substantial amount of government funding, and we could have done that, but that was 10 or 15 years ago. We're now dealing with Osmond House, which has been underwhelming for the last 20 years, and we need to do something with that. So we've got all of these heritage assets that are now at our doorstep, and all need work. And I just don't think we can sit here tonight and do nothing. I think we need to, and I think we have actually been prepared to make some good decisions over the last 18 months to get some stuff done. And I think with the heritage assets that we've got to start, I think, respecting them. I think we've got to start investing in them. And Councillor Jim made a very good point. Just because a heritage asset moves from public ownership to private ownership, it doesn't mean it doesn't stay a heritage asset. And I think that's a very important point. And I know, as the point was made already around the table, there's a lot of determination that we stand by this asset and make sure that it is protected and refurbished and grows in the nature that we want it to do. And I also think it's worth making the point that Council has shown its intent to protect its heritage asset by, for the first time, employing an experienced heritage advisor, and that's something we haven't had before. We're obviously shown our intent in this matter by doing that, and I congratulate the management team on it. I also think the other point that was made, and we have a lot of energy, we have a lot of passion, and we have a lot of influence from the community around this subject, and I really encourage them to go out and use that to find either state or federal or a philanthropist or something that can help us with the conclusion on this subject, because it is going to be a lot easier for us to actually make a final decision if we can feel even more certain about the future of the building. So with those couple of words, I'd like to support Councillor Mason's recommendation and hand back to you.
Councillor Manane, Councillor Mason to close. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to thank everybody for their considered and helpful inputs, and I've nothing more to add now.
Being the case, I put the alternative recommendation to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you. Division has been called. Those in favour: Councillor Aiken, Councillor Grisbeck, Councillor Contell, Councillor Mansfield, Councillor Harwood, Councillor Murray, Councillor Mason, Councillor Asher, Councillor Nelson and Councillor Manane. Those against? That is 0. Thank you. Item 2 is the 2018-19 project funding carryover from 19 to 20. Moved Councillor Manane and seconded Councillor Murray. Councillor Manane, thank you. Well, when you come back to Mother Earth, you can commence. Item 2, Councillor Manane. Thank you.
Firing up.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the recommendation tonight is to adopt the 2019-20 capital and non-capital projection changes to complete projects to be carried over from the 2018-2019 budget. and other adjustments accordingly. Each year we do this because there are always assets or projects that haven't been completed, or are projects that naturally go over more than 1 year. In the 2019-20 budget that we set a figure of 27.8 million. This report adjusts that to 36.2 million, which is an increase of 8.4. Interestingly, last year the amended figure was 36.2, so we've actually improved our position by 13 million during the course of the year. As you're aware, that there's no additional funding required for the carryover amount, either the original figure or the amended figure, and the capital program will go on accordingly. Just on the capital program, it's worth mentioning that the capital program this year was an increase on last year's. I think last year's was 113 million. This year it was 124 million. And I just took out some of the major ones just to give us a bit of reflection. The Armstrong Creek Integrated Child and Community Centre of 10.1 million. The Sparrow Wetlands of 7.8. That's at Armstrong Creek, and that was a land acquisition. The Purnell Road Children's Centre was 7.7. Fleet replacement, and this is mainly heavy fleet items, of 5.2. Road resurfacing of 5. Drysdale Integrated Children and Family Centre of 4.1. Road rehabilitation program, another 4 million. The Highton Family Hub, 3.8. The Leopold Community Hub, 3.4. And the Gerrinap Drain, of all things, 3.1 million. So some really, really substantial projects there, all absolutely essential community needs as we build our community and the growing community that we have. The capital program for 2019 and 2020 is again another 125.3 million and associated income of $23 million. So we really do have a really active capital program in train. For the last 2 years and this year, a big program, and compliments to our staff who are getting through these projects and producing some fantastic assets for the community. So the Sparrowland Wetlands project comes up later in the agenda, but as you can see, that was our second largest spend for the year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mayne. Councillor Murray.
Yes, thank you. I think Councillor Mayne has articulated this matter very eloquently. There was one matter, I think I did hear that Councillor Pat said that it's a record spend of $124.5 million on capital projects, and went through a number of those major spends. So I've got nothing further to add on the matter, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors to make comment? If not, I'll go back to Councillor Mayne to close, please. Thank you. Put the recommendation to the vote. Those in favour, those against, that is carried. Thank you. Item 3 is the Courthouse Youth Arts Strategic Plan and Funding. Councillor Mason to move and Councillor Nelson to second. Thank you, Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this is to present the Courthouse Youth Arts Strategic Plan 2019 to 21 and to seek endorsement for a 4-year funding lease agreement. The Courthouse Youth Arts Centre is an incorporated not-for-profit organisation established in 1996 and led by a board of management. The good news is, Mr. Mayor, that there is an existing recurrent budget allocation to fund CHYA, which would be administered via this funding agreement. The Courthouse Youth Arts provides an accessible entry point for young people interested in engaging with the arts and those seeking to forge a career with the arts sector, and provides a diverse and tailored training program of arts and cultural events. Mr. Mayor, I commend the motion.
Councillor Mason. Councillor Nelson.
I reserve my right, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Nelson, are the councillors to make comment on the Courthouse Youth Arts Strategic Plan? Councillor Murray, thank you.
I think this is a fantastic spend. sometimes I think perception on council is that we spend a lot of money on sports and infrastructure, but this is arts and culture for the kids. There's two age groups that they focus on, but this is a fantastic organisation, and it's $299,130. It's money well spent, and I think the council should be quite proud of the fact that it's going to an area where perhaps a little underprivileged, the youth, and they're able to spend some time in the courthouse, youth arts, and have a great time, and it's a really good thing.
Before I go to Councillor Nelson, who's reserved his right, I'm just going to make some quick comments as well. This council invested around about $6 million a few years ago to actually upgrade the building and bring it up to a standard that we see it today, and it was a huge investment at the time. So I think anyone who says this council doesn't invest in the arts and culture of our city is a little off the mark. And it's also worth mentioning the back-to-back theatre that's housed in there, that are arguably our greatest international ambassadors that travel around the world with their show, or their shows, plural, and the receptions that they get, and the way they conduct themselves and portray Geelong. We're incredibly lucky to have that particular group and those who are part of that group to travel the world as they do, and put on the shows that they do of incredible quality for the work they do. It's a great asset for our region. Councillor Nelson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nothing much further to add other than it's certainly a good feather in our cap that we support this, and this shows that we'll support it again for another 4 years until 2023. Investing in our youth, not just for sport but for arts and culture. As everyone said around the table, it's a great initiative.
Councillor Nelson. Councillor Mason to close, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nothing further to add.
I put the recommendation to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you. Item 4 is the road renaming, Kyneton Way to Casablanca Way, Point Lonsdale. Councillor Manane moving and Councillor Nelson seconding. Thank you, Councillor Manane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This particular item comes under the finance portfolio, so I've been asked to move. I don't know the location, and I have no particular view on the nomination, but I'm happy to move for discussion, but will be probably influenced by my Bellarine ward councillors on their view.
Councillor Mason. Councillor Manane. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I know the road quite well. Someone living on Kyneton Way that I visit on a regular basis. Sorry, I just can't get to the thing. But anyway, and when she told me that they were changing the road name because there's a perception that some people might be able to misspell it, I was shocked. And can't understand why, Mr Mayor, we would change a road because 4 people may think that some people might be offended. I mean, how far left have we got in this council that we think that 4 people may be offended what other people think or what other people might say? Unbelievable. Does that mean we have to change every other road in Geelong that may offend some people, such as Cox Road or Thrush Street or Dickens Road or Fox Street or Hickey Street or Hitchcock Avenue or Bogan Street? Thanks for the 80 for that. Or even Grinders Avenue in Torquay. And Grinders Avenue is a great coffee grinders. So it astonishes me that we're even considering this while this has come to the chamber, because 4 people might be offended. We live in a municipality of 250,000 people. But the reason that my personal interest in this is because 4 people are making a statement for the rest of that street where this the person that I know will have to change every part of her life, so to speak, with regard to getting things sent to her address. She'll have to change her driver's licence, Medicare, all those sorts of things. They'll all have to change because 4 people might be offended. Just ridiculous. So I can't. Bless you. So I certainly can't support this road renaming, Mr Mayor, because I just don't know where it'll end.
Nelson. Councillor Murray?
I don't support this motion either. And you just imagine if you lived in this street, Kyneton Street, and I understand the humour that when this first came out. In fact, I did a radio interview in relation to it because it picked up interest around the place. But when you look at the nuts and bolts of this, it's extraordinary that this has come before council. And as Councillor Nelson has pointed out, I think there's 11 residents in this street. 7 responded to this, 4 in favour of the change and 3 against. And it comes before us with a recommendation to change the names, which I find extraordinary. If it was 7-0, you could understand why it might come before council and perhaps change. But even the letter that went out to the residents, the proposed renaming consultation period is now closed. Thank you for submission. The proposed renaming was initiated due to potential mispronunciation of the road name, Kyneton Way. So it's just potential. There was never any evidence that it was mispronounced. And it's come before council by a developer of those streets back a few years ago. So it hasn't even come to council's attention from the residents themselves. And even in the renaming of the street, the new name Casablanca was chosen as a suitable name and following in the theme of other road names in close proximity. Yet if you do a Google search, there's no other names of shipwrecks in that area. Casablanca is a shipwreck off the coast there, but there's no other streets close by Kyneton Way that are named after shipwrecks. And in fact, these streets are named after molluscs found in Victoria waters. So there's Limpet Circuit, Triton Circuit and Kyneton Way, which, Councillor Jim, did you know they were molluscs?
I do now.
Yeah. So the letter to this resident say we're now proceeding with the renaming, which of course was extraordinary itself. So there's no real reason, I don't believe, that this street name should be changed. And if this motion does get up tonight, it will open up Pandora's box with other named streets, and we will be up Ship Creek. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Aiken.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Look, I wish to support the consensus that seems to be appearing from the councillors to oppose the name change, because I actually do think that this is frivolous and an inappropriate renaming coming before us. And it's quite fascinating, actually, because the recent ATO statistics said that the Point Lonsdale Queenscliff area was the highest income area in the city of Greater Geelong, and the statistical area. Well, where I come from in Norlane, we've got a Cox's Road and we've got a Thrush Street in Norlane, and those names have been there for over 50 years. And the community's never actually giggled or laughed at those particular names. In fact, Cox's Road is known as one of the most significant roadways in Carryover because it passes the library and it passes the Norlane Waterworld. And the community that lives in Thrush Street in Norlane have never, I've actually sort of sniggered and laughed at each other because of some person's, like immature response to that particular naming of those areas. So I do think this is frivolous and it is inappropriate name renaming and shouldn't have been brought before us. And the fact that the neighbouring streets are named after marine species to reflect the environment area that actually exists at that site location was the appropriate basis to give the names of the streets in that particular area. And I think it is appropriate. I certainly didn't know until I read this report that a rock species was a shit-on. I had no knowledge of that at all. And this report actually educated me. Now, I would never have known that if this street hadn't had that particular naming process. So it deserves to be rejected by all councillors as a name change.
Councillor Aiken, I'll just make some quick comments at this point, just that Should this recommendation not get up, I'll be foreshadowing an amended recommendation, and I won't be supporting this current recommendation as it stands. Other councillors to speak? And it's Kyneton Way, for those who are unsure.
I just...
Sorry,
yeah, look...
thank you.
The fact that we're all speaking on it is actually ridiculous, but I feel obligated to, Councillor Asher. I apologise. I shouldn't be giving it any airway, I agree. But, you know, we've been talked tonight about declaring climate emergencies. We've been deciding on whether to sell the post office or not, really significant issues. And then for us to be presented with this is, I agree with Councillor Aitken that it's quite frivolous. It's a minor issue, and if we were to approve it, I really do think we're then starting to set a precedence that's unhealthy for the future. And I think I could sense where we're heading with it. Hopefully, we don't see too many more reports like this. Although you don't want to discount, you know, people being offended by certain names or otherwise. But I agree. There's far worse that we've seen out there. If you compare names, you know, from one street to another, and this one here, I wouldn't have even have pictured it to be a problem.
Any other councillors to make comment before I go to Councillor Manane to close? No, Councillor Manane to close.
I didn't make a strong recommendation here. But then it wouldn't be unusual for me to get knocked off, would it? I don't think I've got anything further.
No. Oh, thank you. Well, that being the case, I'll put this recommendation to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? Well, the recommendation was it's approved to Casablanca Way, so that's we voted against that. So I'll be moving the amendment, which is the councillor not approve the renaming of Kyneton Way, Point Lonsdale to Casablanca Way, Point Lonsdale, and the name Kyneton Way will remain. Councillor Nelson? The amendment? Well, otherwise...
It hasn't been acted on, the name change. It's the officer recommendation, so officers shouldn't be acting. Voting against something then is not positive, is that what you're saying? Because I'd challenge that.
In the local law, Ellie, so you want to challenge that?
I'm challenging that to give us advice telling us voting against something is not a positive motion is actually not the intent. The council has said they reject the motion.
We've got that.
So as a consequence, it's actually lost. And if it's lost, the officers cannot enact a name change for that state, and the status quo remains. I don't accept the advice that we have to have a motion to say we don't wish the name changed, because officers shouldn't be following through an action that we haven't actually approved.
Actually voted against the motion. Underlying technicalities while we're voting against the motion, but we're just clarifying why we're actually doing it.
Can I get that amendment up in print?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to accept your ruling. If you wish to put the alternative recommendation, I'm happy to accept that as well.
It will put us in a stronger position than if we don't.
Yeah.
So the current... That council not approve the renaming of Kyneton Way, Point Lonsdale to Casablanca Way, Point Lonsdale, and Kyneton Way name will remain. How are they going there? Pretty good? Nelson, you okay with that amendment? Okay, I have nothing further to add. Councillor Nelson, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
No. I find in the report where it said it even would help with emergency services finding the address properly, and I just couldn't believe that an officer would even write that. Anyway, I'm happy to support that recommendation.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I'll put that alternate recommendation to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you. Item 5, we have a conflict. Thanks, Councillor Contell. Item 5 is a tender for the Sparrow Vale Wetlands construction works. Moved Councillor Murnane and seconded Councillor Nelson. Thank you, Councillor Murnane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This recommendation is a motion to award contract C190054 for the Sparrowland Wetlands Construction Works project to Goldsmith Civil and Environmental Proprietary Limited. Look, this Sparrowvale Wetlands project is an important project for the Armstrong Creek suburb, and also a pretty important environmental project for the Geelong region, because it does have the potential of becoming quite an asset environmentally in our region in the future. The project itself has allowed for the opening up of the residential developments in Armstrong Creek, and you would have been aware of many flood motions that I've moved over the time that have been loosely aligned to this particular project, and 10 years on we've now got 15,000 people living in Armstrong Creek. So it has been extremely important for Geelong to help us cope with the population growth of our city. So in essence it's been a very valuable, it's been a very important piece of infrastructure, and as I mentioned before, we paid about $7 million for the land, 7.8 in fact, and now we're going to have some works for the project itself. Just for the public, we do obviously look for a suitably qualified and experienced civil contractor to do this, and we do engage the services of an expert panel, including some external internal advice. So it is a project that we need to take very seriously and get some real expertise on. And our evaluation panel does consider the 8 different quantitative criteria in assessing the submission, and Goldsmith Civil and Environmental Private Limited was the most favourable tenderer, and thus I'm happy to recommend their appointment.
Thank you, Councillor Murnane. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A valuable piece of infrastructure for this area, for the new people of Armstrong Creek. It's a pity the environmentalists have left. They must have gone to another emergency. But this one itself is for the 15,000 people that we're getting into the Geelong area, for people to call Geelong home, and this will help with drainage of the water that comes out of the Armstrong Creek area. So it's vital that we have this piece of environmental infrastructure. Otherwise, it might turn a bit pear-shaped. So it's good that we're doing it, but it's a pity that the people that were here a couple of hours ago have now left and they can't see the work that we're doing. Hopefully they're looking at it online. Hopefully.
Nelson, any other comments to be made? Councillor Mason, thank you.
Very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I do recognise that this is an exciting project, and that it's really great we've been able to seize an opportunity to substantially enhance the environment. And I know that there are many stakeholders that are involved with the Lower Barwon Advisory Committee and others who very strongly support this project. And I was really pleased to see that amongst the selection criteria, 40% of them were related to environmental quality, economic and local content, grow, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, recycled content and clever creative innovation. So there's 40% of the criteria go to that, and I think that's really great too. Thank you.
Mason, any other comments before I go back to Councillor Murnane? I'll just make a quick comment in relation to the process we've gone through to get to this point. and the valuable lessons learnt, as we've heard tonight about concerns about the growth of our region, and we look at the northern and the western growth zones to come on. This is a timely reminder to us as a council that we do not rush development. We take every step we need to take, and despite the pressure of developers and community and others, that we will not perhaps make the same mistake twice. I think it's an important lesson that we've learned, and tonight is testimony to that we've actually now got it right, but it's been a painful lesson and duly learnt. Councillor Monet to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and probably, happy that's all. No more. I was going to say something, but I won't.
Thank you, Councillor Monet. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That is carried. Thank you kindly. We'll get Councillor Contel back in the room, and then we'll go into some contractual matters which are go to confidential. Elevated music. Right, no more dancing. It's a contractual matter. It's actually a contractual matter regarding the creating a new civic precinct in the region. That's why it'll be we're looking for a mover and a seconder for confidential. So move Councillor Monet, seconded Councillor Nelson. Those in favour? Those against? That's off to confidential. And our second, item 7 is in relation to the 2019 AFL finals and potential activities based in Geelong as a result of those finals. But I need a move and a second that to go into confidential. Move Councillor Mason, seconded Councillor Asher. Those in favour, those against, that is carried. Thank you. Section C is Assembly of Council. I need a move and a seconder. Move Councillor Murray and seconded Councillor Mason. Those in favour, those against, that is carried. Thank you. And Section D, Planning Delegations. Move and a seconder. Move Councillor Mason, seconded Councillor Asher. And those in favour, those against, they are carried. A mover to go into confidential, please. Move Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Grisbeck. Thank you. Those in favour? Those against? We are now in confidential.